Hello and welcome to a bonus Caged In Conversations episode where I speak to those involved, whether it may be Nicolas Cage films or in this case, somebody who has direct access to the big man himself, Francis Ford Coppola. Of course, you may have seen by the title or you may have read the show notes. It is James Mockoski, who is the head archivist for American Zoetrope. If you're unaware of who American Zoetrope are, it is Francis Ford Coppola's film studio. So James is the man who, when they do restorations and stuff like that, or even if it's just looking after all the footage that Francis has there in his vaults, James is the man looking after it. So, yeah, we get into a lot of stuff in here. And it was great to talk to him, especially since there was the recent release of The Outsiders on a brand spanking new 4K release that Studio Canal put out over here in probably at Warner Brothers in the US. A film that was covered, last week on the podcast with James King. So if you haven't listened to that episode already, get on over and listen to it. Yeah, it's really good. And if you are a fan of One from the Heart, yeah, there's some good news on this episode. And if you want to listen to my episode with Boyd Hilton on that, go back in the archives to check that out. There is a fantastic bit of nugget of trivia that I love in this episode, all about a certain Zoetrope coffee machine that I hope you'll enjoy. So enjoy my conversation with James Mockoski. Today, I have the absolute pleasure of being joined by American Zoetrope's archivist and supervisor for all of their restorations, James Makowsky. How are you today, James?
Oh, well, thank you, Petros. I appreciate it. I saved the absolute pleasure for like Francis or the true artist. You know, I'm happy to be joining with you. So thank you.
No worries.
For the invite. Well, I'm honored that anyone cares.
Well, I'm a massive fan when stuff I love, especially something like The Outsiders, gets a kind of a new release or something, gets seen by more eyes. And obviously without a man like yourself, that possibly wouldn't have happened, and not to the kind of the level of quality and detail that it has been done to. So no, the absolute pleasure is definitely there, James.
Well, with the nice thing about The Outsiders is that we had a strong fan base because of S.E. Hinton's novel that she wrote and loved, and thankfully, Francis, I think, paid good tribute to the novel, and in so much that the fans have both taken on at the love for both the novel and the film. There's not that many films I think that when they're adapting a book, there's always problems, but I think this one it's stayed faithful to the book, and it's one of those rare instances where it all came together.
Well, yeah, obviously, I always love that story of how it came about. That like yourself writing a letter to Francis to get the job at American Zoetrope, it was a petition, right, from a kind of school board that kind of said, "Hey, Francis, we love this book. Can you turn it into a film?"
Yeah, Joel and Misaki, and in California, in the central part of California, loved the book and thought, Francis. She told me, she saw Black Stallion and she thought, well, that was a film of Francis and Zoetrope, and she thought, they did a wonderful job there. It would be great if Francis would do it. And so she had her students write letters persuading Francis. And of course, Francis always says that it doesn't take much for kids to persuade him. Anytime a kid wants him to do something, he's more than willing to do it. So.
Perfect. Well, before we get deep into what you do over at American Zoetrope, I just wanted to ask about like kind of your beginnings and like asking you through what were the films you kind of watched when you were young that kind of made you think like that's something I want to get into. And was it always kind of, I don't know, when did you kind of realize that restoration was the thing that you wanted to get into too?
Well, I didn't get into restoration until like the late 90s, and it wasn't on my radar. I
Mhm.
was a weird kid. I watched things, and much probably like you, late at night, weird films that no one ever would see, would like drive-in fare. It would be weird B horror films that would be programmed late at night. And so those were kind of fun to get into. Um, my mom worked at a grocery store for 30 years, but next door was a movie theater in Santa Cruz, and she would get free ticket. And part of my thing, I would get into
Mhm.
these movie theaters for free. And I remember, watching Indiana Jones 13 times as a kid, or I remember Airport 77. It was just weird things too. Dune, I remember Dune. Now Dune's coming out 40 years later, but I remember seeing Lynch when waiting in line around the corner. I thought, wow, that was a weird film, but it made an impression on me. And so I was 8 years old when it came, and that was a funny film to see as an 8-year-old kid. But
Mhm.
I still remember vividly as like sitting in the front row watching it. But 90s came around, and I was a student, high school student, and I was like, oh yeah, I like films. And the local university, UCSC, was teaching a film course, and my wife, my girlfriend at the time, said, you should go and see about the program. You might like it. And I took classes at the local junior college, and yeah, there was something there, and I enjoyed it. And I production wasn't something that was necessarily my forte, but the history side of things were good, and that I really responded to. And it also helped that the local community was tied into early days of filmmaking. Charlie Chaplin, Bronco Billy Anderson, Tom Mix, Mary Pickford, they all came to our area to make silent films, and that I loved. And I was like, "Oh, that'd be great." And who's teaching about this stuff, and especially local history about when people came to town and made
Mhm.
films in that area. Hollywood in the silent era wasn't Hollywood. It could have been anywhere. It could have been Ithaca, New York. It could have been Santa Barbara. It could have been San Francisco. It could have been London. It could have been anywhere in the world. And Hollywood wasn't really there, and that concept. So it's fun to know that there's so many communities that played an important role in film history, and I like that about it. And I came to after I graduated from UCSC, I came to England because East Anglia, Norwich, England, taught a class. He taught a degree for archiving, especially regional film archiving, and that was very much of how I started. With Santa Cruz and loving the regional film history there at East Anglia. Very much paid tribute to the early days of filmmaking, especially East Anglia, and that tradition caught on in England. You got the Manchester Film Archive. You got Sheffield,
Yeah, yeah.
and great film archives that pay so much tribute to their early days of film history, and that's what I loved about it. And David Cleveland and Jane Elby, who taught East Anglia, really loved. They're the ones that really sort of inspired me to do what I'm doing today. So it all came from England.
Amazing, amazing. So, obviously, like, yeah, what was like the first Francis Ford Coppola film you might have seen? Like, do you remember a kind of, yeah, the first of Francis's film
Black
that you saw?
Stallion was one very early on that I remember seeing. It was a beautiful film. We saw that in school. Outsiders, of course, was taught. I mentioned this before, but everyone here in the states would read that in junior high,
Mhm.
and then at the end of the reading, you would watch that film. Godfather, certainly, I remember seeing it with my mother, but that was something on television. That was, of course, not live when it came out in the theaters. My first introduction was late night television, but I remember my parents loved seeing it. My grandparents loved it, would talk about Godfather. I remember seeing Godfather 3 in the movie theaters. So yeah, it was always there in the coincidentally, I didn't see Apocalypse until around college. But I always saw his earlier films. The Conversation
Mhm.
again was a beautiful film that was made in San Francisco in 1974. So that's always stuck in my mind. Again, a nice, rich local film
Yeah.
made in around San Francisco.
So obviously once you'd left England and kind of headed back, where's that kind of gap? Uh, yeah, what were you doing in that kind of gap before you joined American Zoetrope to help?
It was a small gap, but I went to UCLA Film and Television Archive for about a year or two. Worked starting in shipping, prepping nitrate film for researchers, and did a lot of screenings for researchers. Did a lot of Ben Hecht films, which were great to see on the Steenbeck. Uh, Such a rare opportunity to handle nitrate and seeing it. So I was treated to a wealth of old films that no one would get to see. And then went to work for the David Packard Stanford Theater Foundation that was upstairs, that was connected with UCLA, and worked on a lot of preparing 16 millimeter old diacetate prints from the 20s and
Amazing.
30s, and getting them ready to be restored.
So what in your eyes, like, this may sound like an ignorant question, but what does an film archivist do? Just for those like listening who might not quite understand what that is.
Well, you know, archivists are one that probably wears many hats. I wear many hats. Zoetrope. We sort of do it all that needs to be done in present terms of preservation, preserving a film, making sure it has proper storage, and it's looked after, because a lot of, many years these films have suffered in neglect. They were kept in closets, or they were, as in UCLA, the story of the 70s, that the studios were getting rid of their nitrate. And it wasn't until archivist, and that was not really kind of a term there, but Bob Gitt and Eddie Richmond, and saw that, they're throwing out these films, that there's no negatives. These are the it. If we didn't take them, and so they brought them to campus and stored all their nitrate in campus, and so that's how their archive originated. So we're caretakers
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
of films, and we started as collectors. A lot of film archivists were just 35 millimeter collectors because they loved films and no one else were taking care of them, and so it really started out as the love for film, and needing to take care of them. So we preserve films, and then eventually became that, with technology and things restoring these films. Now that we have this collection, how do we piece them together? How do we restore them? Finding other prints, and making the very best material out of it, because sometimes it's just a patchwork. These films,
Definitely, yeah.
like The Godfather or everything, these films were loved, the negatives were loved, and they were abused, and things were removed because of damage. So we assess our film collections, and make sure that the very best material are used, so people can at least try to appreciate them looking as best as they possibly can with today's technology.
There's a beautiful, like, sadness and, like, romance to the idea of, like, especially you talk about those times when stuff was kind of getting neglected and thrown away, and you always think of, I'm not sure if you're ever tinged with that sadness of probably all of the great stuff that we've lost because of those times, right?
Yeah.
Like, there's almost that, worry I always have, like, there's always those great movies out there that still exist that I'm never gonna get to see,
Yeah.
yeah, let alone those ones that kind of are lost to the sands of time, right?
Yeah, well, at that time it was practicality. It was
Uh-huh.
it was a business. No one ever saw that these films would have any staying power after it's left the movie theater. And on the silent, it made sense. There was no home video. There
Yes,
was
exactly.
very little opportunity to see it outside the theater, and so these things would just be sitting in a vault, and like, what? It's just taking up space.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And you had to move on to the next thing. So it's like Godfather, the saying that it's not personal, it's business.
Yeah.
So it's all business. And so now we once home video came on at Gangbusters, not that long ago, 40 years, 50 years, where things could be shown in a different market,
Mhm.
you know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. they're there for us all to create our own archives of the films we love right at home.
Right,
So instead, so when how did the job at American Zoetrope come about? I've read that you wrote a letter to Francis, right?
Well, I wrote up to Zoetrope and I said, much like the founding of Zoetrope and Francis, they didn't see themselves being a studio in LA or Hollywood. They wanted to be outside and make their own films without anyone owning oversight of any studio heads. And so I didn't see myself living in LA all my life. It was a great town, but a great place to work and experience. And I still love going back. But my roots were in Santa Cruz. My roots were in the Bay Area, in San Francisco Bay Area. And so I said, if there's ever an opportunity, this is what I do, and I would love to come up and talk to you about it. So it just so happened they were wrapping up Apocalypse Now Redux, and that was a rather difficult experience for them because it's so much material, and I think it was like 3 million feet of film that they had to go through, and they all this stuff was kind of in a warehouse and didn't really have a full-time person to go through it. They had a wonderful person named Catherine Craig, who was the archivist at the time, but also worked at ILM. It's sort of her day job, but she sort of split duty. And when they were going into One from the Heart, new cut restoration, photochemical restoration, and Outsiders, the complete novel cut, they said, well, let's try to do this again. Let's maybe get someone that can go in and figure out what we need to make it easier, make their jobs easier. And so I fell into a good time. So it's luck. I fell into it by chance. Timing is everything.
What was that first meeting with Francis like? Were you, obviously, as a fan, were you nervous?
Oh, of course. I mean, I remember the first time seeing Francis. I was in San Francisco, and he was looking at a cut of One from the Heart, and the guy that hired me was Kim Aubrey, a great man that brought me on. And he said, "Well, come on, Francis is in town. Why don't you talk to him?" And so that was sort of my first introduction to him. He says, "Francis, this is the guy who's taking over to look over your library of films." So since then, I guess I haven't screwed up too much. I've been almost 20 years.
Amazing. So what was the first project you worked on? Was it One from the Heart? Was that kind of already the
It was sort of in tandem. One from the Heart and Outsiders were both going on at the same time.
Amazing. One from the Heart. I'm not even an apology. I'm a massive lover, especially of those 80s kind of forgotten Francis films. One from the Heart being one of them. It's kind of beautiful.
It doesn't get as much love as we'd like, but I mean, I hope that we will do a 4K restoration on it, and I think it will look good, especially in HDR with all the neon, the bright. I think it lends well to HDR, especially I think Apocalypse cried out for HDR in some ways. So there's some fun things to explore with new technology, and that's been a very fun thing for Francis and the company to get involved in.
Well, because you dug through the archives, right, to put together the Dream Studio, that documentary that kind of, I think it came out on that release, right?
On One from the Heart. That's all Kim Aubrey's, and I helped find all the extras that went into making that. Yeah.
Amazing. I love that kind of insight into, because that kind of the idea of Zoetrope Studios is a fascinating story that I absolutely love.
Yeah, well, what great thing about Francis and the company is that they didn't throw anything away. Francis saw that as something the studios did, but he thought it was very wasteful. Of course, it was practical for them because it took up space and it was costing them money. But Francis said, it's going to cost me, if I had to reshoot that stuff, it's going to cost me some money. I'm going to keep it for historical interest, and maybe I'll reuse it. And a lot of the music cues that we used in Apocalypse, a lot of the choral music, we've reused throughout and sprinkled throughout many of those other productions, and we've used footage. The stuff that you saw for the Dream Studios, that was all shot on 3/4 inch by Tony Scott and Scott at that time, because he thought, people for the press or publicity and marketing the film, you need that stuff. You need all that extras, the press kits in some ways. And so why don't we do it? Instead of studios hiring or paying extra, they could hire us to do that. And so he was always very much thinking about that, especially on Apocalypse. Eleanor, his wife, shot a lot of behind the scenes, and that later became Hearts of Darkness.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
he
yeah.
always thought at that time, have a crew on set shooting the stuff because you could package that for some other thing. So
Well, yeah, looking through a lot of the kind of DVDs or like whatever releases of the films, whether it's Francis or Sophia's and Romans, you always kind of see Eleanor's name pop up. I think it's recently I was watching Marie Antoinette, and she kind of
yes,
again filmed the
she's
kind of behind the scenes stuff of that, and I love that kind of family aspect that obviously you get from American Zoetrope. What is it like being a part of that kind of? Is there like a family atmosphere to kind of like getting things done over there?
Yeah, Roman is very much sort of the family documentarian, or Ellie in a way also the documentarian. She's always on set to capture her family's films or Roman's films, or Sophia. She would be there capturing from so that home movie kind of aspect of it because these were her family films. Yeah, but Roman is always very much aware of the archive and wants to make sure that we do preserve it and that it's not lost. So they do care about the library and because it is for them home movies,
Of
so it's
course,
their family.
of course. So yeah, with this new release of The Outsiders, tell us a bit about what it was like putting together this new 4K restoration of the film.
Well, with the 4K restoration, and Francis had talked about this in the intro, is that the photography had to be there,
Hmm.
to do that. And Stephen Burham's photography is phenomenal. It. Francis is spoiled. He has some great cinematographers from Vittorio and Caleb Deschanel and Carol Bell. I mean, and Stephen. To do his cinematography justice, you really have to go back to the negative. There's always a bit of a controversy about making it sure that the uh, what people saw in the theaters. Well, a lot of times when things went into the theaters, it was often due inner negative. That's three generations away, and the things get crushed. The image gets crushed. The resolution is not quite there, and you lose a lot of that detail. And it's not necessarily what Francis or Stephen wanted. At best, we would wanted them to see a print off the original negative,
Hmm.
but practicality, you don't want all that wear and tear on your negative. You have to go through that intermediate stage to make thousands of prints.
Yeah.
So the practicality of it, it's not possible to give you that answer print. But now I think you can get that experience that Francis and Stephen really wanted. So they were much of an advocate to go back to the original negative and use that to really highlight and preserve that original information that no one really got to see.
Hmm.
And I think you see that the Gone with the Wind segments, the clouds, the beautiful sunsets, the rich detail that sort of got kind of murky or lost as it went through that release printing process. Now is kind of there for everyone to see.
There's an amazing special feature on the disc that you kind of break down a couple of elements of it, and there's that one of the flashback sequence of their parents and stuff like that, and you kind of like it's great to see those kind of the different prints of it, whether it was the kind of 2000 like mid 2000s kind of DVD
Mhm.
release or whatever, and yeah, the richness in colors and stuff like that. Like obviously having Steve Burham was like he was involved right with this kind of
He was
restoration.
certainly there from day one involved with the color, and you need that. You have to have Francis, and you have to have the artist and cinematographer to bless the material. I'm lucky to have that. Many archives don't have
Yeah.
lost touch because they've passed on and they don't have that. So I'm lucky I still have them to guide the restorations and what they want and how they want to present the films. So The interesting thing, I've seen some reviews, and I think maybe we've done a poor job highlighting this, but there's a difference between the 1983 color grading versus the 2005 color grading,
Mhm.
and it was intentional. For Francis, for Stephen, the complete novel is a different film,
Yeah.
and it was different intent. So if you did side by side comparisons, but on the 4K release, and he said, well, there is a difference in this scene versus the 83 4K. Why? And maybe
Yeah.
they were being sloppy and they didn't carry it over. It's like, no, it's intentional. It's certainly the intent of the 83 release and the original release prints was a more romantic, dreamy aspect of the color grading versus in 2005, where we chose a score that was contemporary. It was more natural. So
Mhm.
when you look at the skin tones, you look at the brothers, it is a very more neutral
Mhm.
experience than if you did a side by side comparison to 2000, excuse me, 1983, the original release. And I think that we could have probably done better in marketing in this is that, when you see these, they are two different experiences,
Yeah,
they're
yeah,
two
yeah.
different films.
Well, I've heard you mention in other interviews that when obviously you were restoring Apocalypse Now for the kind of 4K release, that Francis kind of said to you, "I'm not quite done with that film."
Yeah.
Was there ever like a thing with the outsiders where you're like, we're working on this restoration? Is Francis going to come through the door and say like, "Hey, I'm not
Yeah.
quite done with that," or was it kind of you knew from day one we can rest easy and kind of just work on this restoration without any tinkering happening?
No, I think he always in the back of my mind that Francis could come in and say, there was something I wasn't able to do. But Outsiders was one he felt that 2005 that was it. He because of the novel,
Yeah.
because of what he shot, he felt that was as complete as possible. Now, Apocalypse is as a story that it, he shot a lot of material, and the script was so dense, and even he didn't know how it was going to cut until he got back from the Philippines, and so it was more malleable. It had ways it could go into different directions, and so the '79 cut came out of the time and in the studio and where his mind was at the time, but there was still a lot lost that he thought wasn't appropriate at the time, but after what 30 years thought, not as weird. It's not. Maybe it could work. Let's try. Let's throw everything in. But then, what 2019, 2018 comes around. He says, maybe everything in the kitchen sink wasn't quite it, but let's try to find something in the
In the
middle.
middle.
So, Apocalypse kind of was that film that's right for that reworking and
Yeah, yeah.
retelling, and it's good. I like that. As an archivist, it's not just that we're sit in one, this is it. Francis is very much of the artist to say the storytelling is malleable, a thing, and they do change over the years, and that's because audiences change.
Yeah, yeah, of course, of course. And obviously whether it's yeah, famously stuff happens with studios, right? Whether it's I don't know, or taste change. I know
Taste change, yeah.
one of the early one projects you worked on was the Cotton Club Encore, right? When would that have
Cotton
been?
Club. Yes, Cotton Club Encore was God, what was it? We That was a 5-year journey. I think we started in 2011 and ended in 2016 or something like that. Never knowing that we would ever see the light of day, but he started it and invested his money to do it. But thankfully, it did come out in 2016 with a limited theatrical release. But it was a vision of his that what 1983, 84 that it he wasn't in control of the film and he was work for hire, but he had to make decisions based on what they had wanted
Mhm.
at that time. And Robert Evans, it was a very difficult project for him at that time. So the decisions were made that wasn't exactly what he felt he
Yeah, yeah.
wanted to do. They wanted a Godfather, and that was not his interest. He already made that, and but for whatever it was, and he will say that his critiques were too many black people and too many dance numbers, and he goes, "Well, what the hell is that about? It's the Cotton Club. This
Yeah,
is
yeah, exactly.
about an African American experience in New York, and how else to tell that?
Exactly.
What 30 years later, he got the chance to really make the story more even, more balanced, more Maurice Hines and Gregory Hines, and telling that beautiful story between those brothers, and that was missing.
What was it that took that project so long to kind of like see start to finish? Was it kind of uh finding some of that like old footage? Like,
Yeah, we never could. We're still missing about 9 minutes of that negative, and I had
oh,
to go to a daily positive prints, a daily's material to find. Basically, tall 10 and terrific number is dailies rolls, positive prints that they used as cheap material just for review purpose and to use it in the work print. And that was all that I could find. I never could find the negative that made those dailies. And So it's about 9 minutes still missing. They look great. I don't think you could ever tell, or they thankfully people have been kind enough to say I don't know. Maybe they can, but it's a great number to have lost over time, and so I'm glad we were able to do. We and there's all the weird things too, where Lynette McKee's great number of stormy weather, uh, we couldn't find the quarter inch that they had recorded in the Sherry Netherland basement, where her vocal coach was in the piano doing the number, and they were practicing and rehearsing, and they would be recording this so they could have playback on set.
yeah.
Well, uh, so we have a work print of that a couple generations away from that quarter inch. Never could find that quarter inch, but we have that mono recording. Now that's all we have, and that's all we were able to use because they just cut that number
Mhm.
pretty early on, and they decided never to go into studio to re-record that. So what we have from the basement of that hotel is basically what you see in this cut, and it works well. I think people. I think the number hasn't lost. Uh, it's not cheapened. It doesn't sound
Mhm, definitely.
uh, or what am I trying to say? I guess I'm happy that how it turned out.
Amazing. So how are decisions made with you guys of which film is going to get a restoration? Is it a case of like The Outsiders, it's an anniversary, or is there stuff where it's just like, I don't know, Francis gives word and says, "Hey, should we revisit this one now?" Or yeah, how do the decisions get made?
So it's luck of the draw. It is the numbers turning 40. Certainly, Outsiders is 40 is coming up. It's not yet,
Mhm.
but that came out because we were good friends with Tom Luddy and Telluride, and they wanted to do something in time with an article that came out before COVID, Elena Dunham, and they wanted to do it. And they said, "Well," I said, it doesn't look great. We have something, but it's not the best. If we have it out at a festival, I would like it looking as best as possible." So COVID kind of gave us an opportunity to go back and do it properly. And so it's like, well, we'll do it ahead of the 40th anniversary, and then there's a play coming out for the 40th. So it'd be great to have it looking as best as possible. So, but then, things with Apocalypse, Francis it's on his mind. He says, "Oh, I want to go back to it." So things are sitting, noodling around that he wants to go back and tinker. So we just sort of, as things go, it's like, okay, One from the Heart's probably going to be the next thing that we work on, and it just lines up. So,
Perfect, perfect.
but I'm running out of films. The library is not huge, so I can't do things too quickly, other I'll be out of a job.
So yeah, I guess well, how does it work with certain films? Because I know that a film like Rumblefish, like a
Yeah,
few years ago, got a restoration done. Were you involved in that?
Criterion did it. No, I wasn't. Lee Klein did a fabulous job with his crew at Criterion, and we don't see how we could improve on that. Steven was involved in that, and we did a proper 4K restoration in 2011. That was a little early. We weren't quite involved in restorations at that
Mhm.
time. We were just doing them outside at labs that I would oversee. And but it wasn't until Cotton Club that we thought, oh, maybe we should start doing this and looking into it. And the technology certainly was approachable for us to kind of learn. We've been sitting in sessions long enough to know what we want and we don't want. So
Amazing. Yeah, because I know that recently I picked up the Indicator Blu-ray for Gardens of Stone, and is that one that's owned by Zoetrope, or is that kind of
no,
that's
that
a
would be
Sony?
Columbia
Yeah,
Sony, and good friends with the people at Sony, and maybe hopefully one day we'll touch that.
is yeah is it?
So, and same with Peggy, he's also
Yeah.
with them as well. So
So, and I guess what is it? Next year will be the 50th anniversary of The Godfather, right? 70.
Godfather's turning, yes. So we did Godfather 3, which we retitled
Yeah,
as
yeah.
Coda. It's Death of Michael Corleone last year. But next year will be the big year for Godfather. So Paramount's cooking something up that will be special, and I hopefully people will be excited and turn out for.
Do you get to be involved in stuff like that, or is it kind of out of your
Yeah,
hands?
we certainly were involved. So you'll hear more about that, but
Perfect, perfect. I look for
on their timing. So,
amazing. Sorry, not trying to push you, James. Don't worry. This
no.
isn't that kind of
Well, certainly
podcast.
they're not going to miss a good opportunity like the 50th anniversary.
Of course not. Of course,
Yeah, so.
the hunger is definitely there from the fans. I'll tell you that for sure. So what? Yeah, what is the working relationship with yourself and Francis, and kind of how hands on is he as a boss? Like,
Well, in the very beginning of the restorations, he when we did Apocalypse for the Blu-ray, we sat in the color, and he will say what he wants and what we would spend our time on. And over the years, I sort of grew to understand what he cares most about and how we would approach it. So, um, I think when we start the restorations, I have in mind what he likes and dislikes, and it's been very rewarding to have it in-house because we could spend the time on it when we're at a lab. It's of course the meter is running and it's more harder on the budget. So that's the nice thing, and especially I could do things in my living room and spend the time and weekends and late nights if I want to. But Francis, at the end, will come in to look at the color, and we'll say, okay, how far more he will want to go, clean up or for color, and he'll make his notes. So it usually, at this point, we're at a good position where we'll tee it up for him. We'll get things to a point, we'll get it ready to go to a lab, and we'll bring him in at the end to see. And usually that's been good. We've known him long enough to know, what how we should present it to him.
so what do you think? Like, it might be a weird question, but like the job of a like restoring a film is in a way, because obviously like there's people have these romanticized ideas of like I don't know, seeing films on like the way they saw them originally, right? Whether it's like they might have seen it on like a beaten up 35 mm print that kind of got road showed around, and like, yeah, who do you have in mind? I guess like when you kind of restore these films, is it kind of how the director and the DOP might have intended it, or the stuff that they go, I really wanted to
Well,
do this, but I couldn't quite do it.
yeah, I'm not. I mean, it's a good point because I mean the philosophy, and especially in my field, is we're not doing anything that is not true to what people had saw originally.
Mhm.
With that, I mean that's a hard thing to achieve because you're never going to get the same speakers as people heard the films back then. So sound is never going to be quite the same. Uh, uh, are we achieving an experience of a film print that's been road showed for 100 screenings? No. Well, but Tarantino loves all that aesthetics, the scratches and the dirts, and that's kind of embedded. That's how he experienced it. But that's not necessarily how either DP or Francis would want people to see. He wants that sort of gets in the way of the story. You have to kind of let go that. So for him as an artist, it is about the story, and those things kind of get in the
In a way.
way. So wait, there is a balance. I'm not going to do anything or add anything that wasn't there. For instance, The Outsiders. We went back and found all the opticals, the negative that went to the opticals. That's something they could have done back in '83, but because of at that time, the budget or whatever. They didn't do A/B rolls to create those fades and dissolves. They were printed in. But other films like Apocalypse Now, those weren't printed, and those day fades and dissolves, they created an A/B roll because they had the budget. And Outsiders, they did. So we felt that Francis, but now we have the ability to do something that they could have done then, but chose not to do it because of economics. So I don't feel that's something that's unnatural. We're certainly not doing effects that computer effects that or visual effects that we are creating that wasn't able to do at that time. So it is a bit of a discussion for us of how far we go, but I try to at least balance that out, that we're creating that experience as if it was a print off the original negative for the first time, looking probably a little bit better than anyone has ever seen it or then saw it there. But that's sort of our discussion of where it's appropriate and all. So.
I guess it's that thing a lot of the time for people. It's how and when they saw a film that is the thing that they're kind of grasping onto, not necessarily the kind of the
and rightfully so. Those are the fans, and they grew up with it, and they got the look. I don't think anyone's really ever maybe there's a few people that still want that look of a VHS, but I don't think people are that great. No. But they're not that sentimental of it, but they are with film, and I get that. I'm not one to remove the film grain. I very much like Outsiders. I did no grain management, and I think we've been rewarded with the comments. People have noticed it, and it's never gotten in the way. Well, a lot of there's different philosophies in other places, and they do want that stripped out or dialed down, and I feel that's a red line or something I don't cross. Because I don't want to erase that film aesthetic.
It's definitely it's got a beautiful aesthetic, like and I think it does come back down to like the photography from Stephen Burham, and it kind of feels like what you've guys done with this restoration is just honored that. I know your colorist on the special feature talks about the fact that there's slight tweaks with something like the blood on that scene when Johnny Cade kills Leif Garrett's character, but that is kind of signed off by Steve Burham himself, right? It's kind of, we wanted to, or like you were saying about like the kind of the dissolves and the fades. It's like that thing of that the technology wasn't quite there to make it as punchy as they originally intended, right?
Well, I mean, it wasn't as punchy because they layered and made a dupe negative that had all the stuff crunched together. But now we could scan it separately and relayer it, and you're not losing that. And that's kind of what Stephen Burham, it was beautiful, but it lost something during that release. It was 4 or 5 generations, I'm guessing, but away. And so it sort of crushed it, made it milky, or you sort of lost a resolution. And here you kind of you preserve his original photography, and that it makes it on par with the rest of the negative. So I think especially when it's important when you go into 4K because you can notice those differences. When we saw the first DVD, you don't notice those differences so much, but if you go from original negative of 4K to some dupe, you do see a shift between. It's not cutting well. And so you don't want people to be taken out of the story. It's not a Brechtian experience. You need to you shouldn't be able to be taken out of the story.
Definitely. Yeah. There's definitely I always have those moments with like stuff when it's kind of restored onto higher resolution. And I'm not going to name films, but there are certain films where you're like, oh, they very much fit the time they were made and the kind of quality of presentation that they had, because all of a sudden you start seeing some glaring errors once you kind of boost up to like a 4K restoration. Or do you know what I mean?
Well, and this is a problem, and I know I've worked at another, when we did a film, it was a concern when you do older titles and you're going to project it on a larger screen. Are those effects going to hold up? And a lot of times they don't. Thankfully, Apocalypse Now wasn't a heavy visual effects film. They are all practical effects, and thankfully we haven't had that that problem, but a lot of visual effects films from that era do sort of fall apart.
Mhm.
And yeah, I wouldn't ever try to correct that digitally to make it better, but that's just that's a discussion we'll have
Definitely.
with our artists. So, but I've never come from I shouldn't be the one making those decisions. It's the artists to
Mhm.
do it, and and something to say is that that's kind of why it's been nice to have these separate versions, the complete novel or redux or final cut, is that they allow them to explore doing something different. There is a different presentation. We'll offer the original cut as it was back in with the first release, but when I do a restore, I don't know if restoring is the right word, but I call these things a new presentation. I rather use the word presentation because it affords the ability, for instance, to go out and present something in a different way, in a new light, to hopefully find a new audience.
Definitely, definitely.
It's great to look at one part and we need to appease and not forget our fans because they made these films special, and that's why we're here today, appreciating these films because they've held a candle to say these films shouldn't be forgotten. But we need to keep finding a new audience so it continues to find a new life well beyond us.
Definitely. It never feels there's sometimes in with like restorations or kind of like new releases that feel, I don't know, there could be a cynical edge to it with these kind of restorations. You can tell that there's love and attention gone into it, and it's kind of
Yeah.
doing right by the artists. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, there is about a balance. Fans are great, and they can be very opinionated, rightfully so. And it's hard. It's hard if there's ever changes or drastic changes because it doesn't live up to their experience, and that. So I at least want to be faithful to try to obtain their experience, but also offer something that a new generation doesn't know film grain, and
Yes,
you
exactly.
sort of have to re-educate people of why that's sort of important, and a lot of people won't care. We're dying out. The people who love film, that aesthetic of film, thankfully Tarantino and Nolan's out there highlighting what film and still shooting on films, but we are. I don't know, I hate to say we're kind of a niche film enthusiasts, but there's more and more people, yeah, they don't know what film is or
Yes.
film grain is, and so you have to. It looks weird to them. It looks wrong
Yeah,
because
yeah, yeah.
they're seeing something on their digital TV and streaming. It looks pristine and sharp and clear, and like it's never going for us. Our films are never going to look like that,
Yes.
and so
So, was there a difference between like working on a project over lockdown and kind of, you said it obviously afforded you more time, but did your kind of workflow change at all? Or was it kind of a lot more freeing to kind of go, we've got this time and I could kind, as you said, you can kind of work at home. Did,
I think we were COVID ready. We were already working from our homes. I had a workstation. I have my editor who works in his home in the Central Valley, Modesto, and we were ready. I think we had a good setup already established, and then when lockdown happened, it was hard for other studios to get work done. So the studios I work, they couldn't go to China or India because they were also experienced lockdowns, and the places with the studios that they were working with, they couldn't get cleanup. So we picked up some extra work for that because we were continuing to do it. We're not as fast as those facilities. We're just two people, but we were able to keep the machine going, and thankfully able to help out on other projects.
Beautiful. It sounds like you're very much there, like Tucker doing stuff in his kitchen building cars. So it's good
Yeah,
to hear you.
that is the Zoetrope experience. You're a homegrown studio, and we don't have all the fancy gadgets at all, but we make it work.
Yeah, I always remember there's a great story of like the original kind of Zoetrope studios that Francis and George Lucas kind of set up, and the one thing that made it special to lots of people was the fact that they had a cappuccino machine, and it's that thing of as long as you've got a cappuccino machine, you can get a film made.
That machine, and that's still around. We actually, I went over to the Skywalker Ranch, where
Mhm.
George's facility over is, in the North Bay here, and that's sort of a proud moment. People who know, they once tried to replace that machine, the cappuccino machine. It was given to them at Tucker when they worked on Tucker, and Francis gave it to them. And they decided the new administration came in and wanted to take it out and put a machine that just push a button and out.
Yeah.
And people were like, "Wait a second, where's the old cappuccino, the espresso machine?" "Oh, we were going to get rid of it." And they said, "No, no, that makes great coffee." And so they brought it back in. They put a special place in the kitchen for it and got new plumbing for it and all. It's still there.
Perfect. Perfect.
It still has a little plaque on it that says from Zoetrope Studios.
Amazing. That thing is a part of cinema history, so I'm glad to hear it's doing okay. So obviously you've been in rooms with Francis Ford Coppola, I imagine, like Walter Murch. Is there moments when you've kind of like almost had to pinch yourself, being like, as a film fan, and kind of especially this localized thing, these kind of Bay Area legends? Are there certain moments where you've gone, what am I doing here?
Certainly, and I certainly have learned to just shut up and listen, because when they're talking, you're certainly learning, and that's why I always try to be the fly on the wall and absorb what they're saying and doing, because it is a special. Walter is brilliant, and it's so wonderful. What's great about Walter is not just the film experience and all of what he's doing. He has such a great knowledge about the universe, and he sees connections around, and things going on around him, and he tries to connect that with his work. And I always enjoy just sitting and listening to these guys. And I always feel. I mean, out of my depth, because I'm not that intellectual, and I always feel I'm dumb. And I just wished I was bad, but I'm just feel I'm honored to be at that table, and just listening to what these guys' experiences are, and what inspires them.
Is there any like words of wisdom or kind of lessons you've learnt that you'd be willing to share?
I
That
think I
kind of
just said it. Just shut up and listen.
just shut up and listen. No, yeah, I obviously didn't learn that lesson when you said it. What a fool! That is something I will definitely take on moving forward. Amazing. So, what kind of stuff are you working on at the moment, or is it all kind of hush hush at the moment?
I don't
What
know.
you're doing?
Different. I'm going to work on one from the heart eventually that will get around. I mean, my library is so small, you could probably guess what I'll be doing, and I have by the gut what I haven't done. Um, so you'll see. Of course, we have the 50th. We've alluded to that, and one from the heart will be special to us. I think they'll do, but we still have a few things in
Yeah.
the archive that we have yet to touch, and we will get around to it.
Will that? I know that just before COVID happened, there was supposed to be a kind of like the conversation was supposed to hit the road, right? As a new 35 mil print.
Yes, with we made two 35 millimeter prints. It was a photochemical restoration we did back in I want to when I first started. I want to say around 2002. I think it was about 2002. We made new intermediates at that time. It had never been shown, and we were supposed to go with Rialto, but well, for whatever reason, the deals never got done, and it just sat and languished in the vault forever. So now we were getting ready, and we made the deal with Rialto to go back and release a print from that effort. Of course, it's almost 20 years that no one's seen those prints. It's new 35 millimeter prints of restored film elements. But eventually we're going to have to do a proper 4K digital restoration of it. But I think there are two different efforts, one from the photochemical world and one will be from the digital world. So
Perfect. So, do you ever worry that you got to keep keeping up? Because obviously, like, I imagine in like 20 years, like, kind of, we've seen the advent of Blu-ray. Well, like, yeah, it was like early DVD. Then we've had the advent of Blu-ray. Now it's 4K. Where do you see that going? Or are you kind of like, we're gonna coast for a while
yeah,
here?
I know my wife always says, she catches me. She said, you always say we're at a good leg, but then we redo it. It's like, didn't we say that at Blu-ray that we were done? But I think with 4K, you kind of hit a plateau. If you look at, I think we did on Apocalypse Now, the 40 years of home video releases from the CED disc to disc DVDs, and the jumps in quality that was made in home videos are now starting to kind of plateau on just the general. I think the general audience can see the difference between VHS to
Yes.
DVD, and that was a huge jump. And then DVD to Blu-ray kind of picked it up a little bit better, but now you're kind of getting leveling off, and those differences are kind of, for the general audience, are kind of like, I don't
Yeah.
see it, other than us crazy people who love it. But I mean, after 4K, I just don't see what that they're going to see detail that no one ever saw. I remember seeing in a lecture advocating doing 8K or higher scans, 10K, 12K, whatever, and the difference in the shine of a necklace, a pearl. No one ever
Yeah,
thought it was
yeah.
never there, and even the answer for it, that was lost. So I don't know how much in the weeds we need to go. I think we're at a very good point in technology that this is, if this is it, I'm very proud of this work, that both theatrical and the home video experiences kind of got to that a good level to preserve the quality that had been lost in home video over so many years.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time, James. It's been a great insight into the dream studio that is American Zoetrope, and
Yeah.
the
As you can
stuff
say,
you're
I'm
doing.
happy to talk. As you can say, I said shut up and listen, but it gets hard to do in a podcast. So. Hopefully I didn't blab too much.
No, it's been an absolute pleasure. I said it at the beginning, and I'm going to say it again. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast, James.
Well, thank you very much.
Well, there we have it, guys. That was my conversation with James Mockoski. I hope it was as informative and a joy to listen to as it was for me to have that conversation. I really love this, and I'm always amazed that the people who speak to me, and it was an absolute honor to have James on. And yeah, do be sure to check out all the stuff he's doing with American Zoetrope, and kind of like I don't know, like. It doesn't feel cynical what they're doing over there. Well, we kind of touched on it in the episode, and it might have sounded a bit sycophantic, but it doesn't feel like they're just they really want to share these films with people. It's not just being like, oh, there's a new format, let's cash in, which I know can often feel like the case sometimes when you get like, oh, it's a VHS release, it's a DVD release, it's a Blu-ray, it's 4K, it's 8K, it's beamed into your eyeballs through modern technology that doesn't exist yet, but I'm sure will exist when our robot overlords come to take over. A massive apology to anyone who was looking forward to this episode, and the fact that it's late. I've just not been a very well boy lately. I've been feeling a bit ill, so yeah, sorry about that, but it's here now. It's only a few days late, and yeah, very much hope that you enjoyed it. So as for next week, well, yeah, as for the next episode on the podcast, it will be my conversation with Charlie Vero Martin all about the John Schwartzman, not Jason. Jason has nothing to do with this film. It is the John Schwartzman lens. No, it's not even that. So it is the first in a triple bill chats of the 50 Shades of Grey films, starting obviously with 50 Shades of Grey, and there is no Coppola connection with this film, but it felt like we needed to talk about the first one before we got on to the second two, which are lensed by John Schwartzman, not Jason. So it was a lot of fun, and I think you guys are going to have a lot of fun with this one, so do check out that one next week, because oh boy, we get steamy, we get hot, we get sexy, and we also get put through a lot of pain when we talk about 50 Shades of Grey. So if you enjoyed this podcast, please don't hesitate to support by heading over to Patreon, which is patreon.com/cagedinpod, where you can, just for £2.50 a month, you can get access to the brand new Movie Brat Bros series, which I'll be looking at the films of Brian De Palma and seeing how they compare to the films of Francis Ford Coppola in the given year that they were released. Or you can head on over to coffee.com, so it's ko-fi.com/cagedinpod, and just buy me a digital cup of coffee. So I like them digital cups of coffee. They really keep me nourished and full, and that would be bloody lovely. Or you can always head on over to Apple Podcasts, Acast, or wherever you're listening to this podcast right now and leave a sterling 5-star rating and a little review. Tell me what you think about the podcast. Tell me what your answer is to what does Bill Murray say to Scarlett Johansson at the end of Lost in Translation. I would love to know your answers. So as always, I have been Petros Patsilivus, your guide through the crazy world of the Coppola family tree. Remember to keep it caged in, and I'll catch you next time.